Happy Saturday. I think today is called Social Saturday or something like that. And I think a lot of times that's like a celebration of things that are going on in your own life and things that you are doing and or reaching out to people. It's kind of similar to Friendship Friday in that way. But I was thinking about it today and I was like, you know, there's a topic that would really fit well. I had a really amazing conversation with a friend the other day, and I was discussing the idea with them about the term agency. And it's something that I thought on today, a day that's supposed to be about, being social, that we should talk about it because agency plays a role in workplaces, in your relationships, in your friendships. It is a factor that if you don't stop to consider in a lot of the decisions that we make. There are many places where you could interchange the word agency with power dynamics. But let me go through and describe a little bit about what I mean. So having agency is the ability for one to make the choices for themselves or express ideas or thoughts about your wants and take action on those without the fear of interferences. And I could mean like interferences through outside pressure, through punitive action, through exclusion or rejection. And I know that seems like a pretty big ask because realistically, life, there are a lot of times that we're going to make decisions or be faced with doing things that we may not have complete safety on, but agency should be that anything like that you've created in your own head is what exists. It's not actual, right? So for example, a manager whose employee feels like the manager won't take action, won't listen to any of their concerns, and is just either stuck with dealing with what is and or quitting. Those are the two options mentally in their head. Doesn't feel like they have the agency to speak up because more than likely if they do speak up in that case, not only are they not going to be listened to, but maybe they're going to get punished or lose out on an opportunity. So it is the beyond the one step, it is into another one, if that makes sense. And one of the things that's really important to recognize is that power dynamics can help shape agency. Those dynamics exist on all three of those levels that I talked about before, and I'll kind of walk through some examples. They probably exist in a few more ways as well. Agency can show up in a relationship, a romantic relationship, if one person has more power than the other. And you might say, well, what does that mean? Well, in relationships where one partner is the major breadwinner, brings the financial ability to live home, they might share a bank account, they might share finances, or maybe they don't. Whatever that looks like, it does not matter because the paycheck that comes in has one person's name on it. So there is a lot of work to be done in those cases to create safety and agency, to feel like you can, go ahead and make decisions without having to involve that person or being worried about how the person will interpret your decisions. In friendships, there can often be, and I've been in this situation myself many times, where one person has more invested in the friendship than the other. And that could be for many different reasons. It could be purely because some people are highly sensitive and attach themselves to people very easily. And it could be because, other people have walls up and maybe they don't do that. There could also be considerations around what somebody has capacity for. And in all those cases, the person who cares less has more power. And therefore, for the other person, it can feel like they may not have agency to speak to their needs and wants without repercussions. And then in the case of work, I give the example of a manager before, but if you had any leader in your organization or any teammate that was particularly, I want to say vindictive, even though that feels like a very harsh word, but it probably fits, about how they deal with conflict, then you don't just take on addressing conflict with the worry and fears that come with that. Generally, you also take it on with worries about agency. Will this person then try to get back at you? Do they have a better relationship with the manager than you do? All of these things come into play. And when you're leading teams, you should be aware of those things, not because you can control them, but because there's power in being aware, right? There is a grace that comes with being able to understand what that power dynamic looks like and ways that we can kind of get around it. Because when we acknowledge it, it actually helps defeat it sometimes. So we give you a couple examples. So the very first one, and this was centered around my conversation with this friend, was the gender biases that exist between men and women, and how that shows up in terms of women having agency to do the things that they want to do. When I consider taking on any kind of role with power, or even bringing up conflict, I have to consider how I'm going to be portrayed under the gender bias that exists for women, being that women don't know how to get along with other women, women are catty, women, in some cases, women being ambitious is looked down upon. I've definitely had to deal with that in my life. And, so then when I'm speaking, I'm bringing all of that to what I'm saying. And sometimes that actually brings its own complexity, right? Like you can't shoot as straight as maybe a man would in the same situation. And I think on vice versa, on men's side, there are probably times where they would like to be more vulnerable than what society would say is acceptable for men. Again, acceptable. But then, that's also comes with its own connotations. And, when we think of power, it always sounds like it's, this negative thing or this aggressive thing, but it is actually just a reality. And we have to consider as people what we do with that, right? So when I talk about each one of these things, so first being gender bias, what I want you to consider is how this could show up for you, whether you be, wherever you fall on the gender spectrum, and how that impacts other people around you. The next one would be power in your role. So, if you are an owner of a company, to stand in front of a room and say, I wish people would just tell me these things. Well, that's a wonderful wish, but then maybe you should also ask yourself, what have I done to make someone feel safe enough to tell me these things? What does someone have to lose, right, by doing that? Alternatively, you should really consider your words carefully, because, we all make jokes, but sometimes an inappropriate joke is made. And if it's made by somebody in a leadership position, someone may not feel like they have agency to address it because they might be worried about retribution, right? There is a lot more on the line for the person, underneath that leader or that owner than someone might realize. And so just turning around and saying, well, you should have said something if you weren't comfortable with it. But if they don't have agency to do so, if they don't feel like they have agency, if they feel like the power dynamic is imbalanced, which, inherently it would be in that case, because one person has the power to stop a paycheck and the other one doesn't have that power. They have no control in that scenario. That is a very real thing. And if you're in leadership, you have to acknowledge that. You have to understand that your words matter and that you can ask for vulnerability as much as you want to. As long as somebody is worried about that power dynamic, you're not going to truly get it. You have to acknowledge that. And then there's power in stature. This is another conversation that came up as well. For people who might have crafted a public image and have a story out there about who they are, there is an implicit trust that comes with that, and that trust needs to be acknowledged and respected. especially when, you know, you're involving people that maybe don't have that same level of notoriety, good or bad, because their story hasn't been written yet, right? So like we need to be cognizant of, if we have any kind of notoriety, if we have any place in the fabric of whatever world that we move in that has notoriety or awareness, then it needs to be used for good, and to be respected. And then just, you know, the conversation I had before about friendships and relationships, be aware of, if one person has something more to lose than the other, then the person who has more should kind of be aware of how that could be, not a weight, but maybe kind of a weight. You know, it's something that needs to be respected, just like everything else. When you approach these things, understanding how agency impacts power dynamics, it doesn't mean that you're going to, you know, give up something that you have, or that you should feel ashamed or guilty for it, or, you know, that it should necessarily change you, but it should maybe make you consider before you act. It should make you consider, you know, what is my role here? What will be the ramification? I think when we talk, and I specifically say this a lot, kindness matters. We talk about kindness, you know, there is ways to use these things for good. And if we're going to put kindness out in the world, it's not enough to just be like rainbows and sunshine and, you know, this is what we want to do. We have to be intentional about it. We have to consider how we show up and how the things that we do might have unintended consequences. And you can't prepare for every eventuality. All you can really do is put that kindness first. Ask yourself and check in with yourself about where the power dynamics are in what you're doing, and you know, really empathy, always to put yourself in the other person's shoes and try and consider, if you were in that place, what you would want in terms of how somebody would address you and handle things. And in leading teams, creating the most space and the most microtransactions, it's an ugly word, but it kind of fits, microtransactions that create trust, and understanding that those can lead to more trust and more vulnerability, which is going to be my next video, which I know I said I was going to do like these, like, and I say like a lot as I'm hearing that, but whatever. I said I was going to do these. I didn't even put a frequency down. I'm going to do them when they inspire me. And I think that vulnerability one will probably end up coming tomorrow, because it's one that I think it goes along really well with this one, but it also is something that probably should be explored a little bit more, because I think we always talk about it from the we should, but not the how. And that's something that I think is important. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying your Saturday, your social Saturday. I'm hermiting, but if that's what you need to do, that's what you need to do.